Welcome back, everybody, to Two Guys in a Stack of Comics. Sadly, still one guy trying to hold down the fort for a bit while Mike is particularly busy these next couple days. I'll try to make sure we get him on for some videos as much as possible, but he has really been going through it lately with work. And so I did get a chance to talk with him about comics this week and what he liked, and so wanted to walk through a rather shorter stack this week. Only 4 or 5 books for this week, but I think it's a good opportunity to talk about these a little bit in depth and sort of talk about some of these series and talk about why I think they're worth recommending. And so I'll start the stack with what I thought was by far the best comic book for this week, which is Batman Second Night. This book from Dan Jurgens and Mike Perkins. Mike and I covered all 3 issues of this first issue, the first volume of this series. It is a fantastic Batman story. For those who have not read that volume, I think you can pick this up and you won't be lost. I think you definitely should pick up that original run, and that it is largely just set almost right after the events of Detective Comics 27. So we're dealing with a very grounded Bruce Wayne, a Bruce Wayne that does not have Alfred. Commissioner Gordon is really one of the only other supporting characters in the book. It's a very it's a late 30s. So you've got that pre-World War II era going on. It's a fantastic era to explore. And this comic book works on so many levels. The art from Mike Perkins in it is just really, really cool. It captures that original Batman, bat suit in a really cool light. And I think that era of these comic book superheroes like Superman and Batman, these ones. And again, here's another just fantastic shot from the book. It covers just such a cool period of time, and I think it allows it to mature the storytelling around Batman to tell some really intriguing things. There's some great appearances of characters in here. Julie Madison, who's a huge part of the very early Batman stories, she plays a prominent role in it. Lois Lane actually shows up in this. I don't know what exactly they'll do with her role, but I think that was an interesting decision to incorporate her. And I think getting to see this version of Scarecrow in this series, is it appears that he will be the main villain, is going to be really intriguing. I think what's really good with this, I'm not the biggest fan of all the cussing and the more mature themes that are in this, but DC, I will give credit, put it as a black label book. And it is well written enough that those overly mature elements just feel like they're part of the story that's being told. They don't feel like sometimes when comic books just have that stuff in there to have it in there because they can. And so I will give Dan Jurgens a lot of credit. The biggest thing I think that stands out in this book that Mike Perkins as an artist just brings you in. The art in this book, it just sets such an atmosphere around it. It's such a cool look at Gotham in this time period. And I'm really excited to see where this series is going to go. I think the first issue of this Batman First Night, the first volume, I thought that was one of the better Batman stories of the last 5 to 10 years. So far, this second volume is really holding up well. And I think if you're somebody who loves Batman but wants a more stripped down version of the character, doesn't want to get bogged down in continuity, and you just want to see Batman as a character, right? Not have to deal with crossover this, crossover that, and different things where Batman's got so many tools and gadgets and all that. It's a really cool and stripped down look at the character. Would highly, highly recommend this, folks. I think this is worth your time. It is a little bit of the price point of $7.99 on this, but I think you are getting, I think, 48 to 50 pages in here. It's the larger magazine format. I think it's just a fantastic comic. And I think the other part of the magazine format, Mike Perkins really takes advantage of that extra space in it. So I think you'll really, really enjoy it if you want some great Batman reading, especially with Batman Day coming up this Saturday. I think it's really, really worth your time. Another Batman story I wanted to highlight that I thought was just a great comic as well. Batman and Robin Year One, number 11. I believe this is the second to last issue of this series. It's a year-long story that's been told by Mark Waid and Chris Samney, capturing kind of the early era of Dick Grayson as Robin, obviously from the title. It's ground that's been explored before, but I think one of the cool things is Mark Waid just does such a good job of exploring the dynamics with Bruce and Dick Grayson and really writing them as believable characters. I think one of the things that you can look at the early portions of comic books, I think especially some of these time periods, like the first year that Robin's in the Batman books and things like that. There's a way you can look at it if you take comics too seriously and kind of go like, Batman's kind of a reckless jerk for putting this kid in the line of fire. And Dick Grayson kind of just comes off as like, oh, the peppy teen sidekick kind of thing. what Mark Waid does such a good job is he explores why that dynamic was the way that it was. He puts it in terms that fit for reality of a comic book, not real world issues. And I just think it's such a fun and engaging story. And again, looking at a different era of Batman storytelling. And I think that's one thing DC Comics is doing really well right now. I have a lot of hope for Matt Fraction and his run on the comic book, but I think in the Batman space of things, Absolute Batman's been doing really well. But Detective Comics has kind of struggled recently, at least in my opinion. The main Batman title has struggled for a couple years. But some of these offshoots they've done, Jason Aaron did Batman Offworld, that was really, really strong. Dan Jurgens' series is there. And this Wade and Sammy run, I think it's just a fantastic comic book. The other part that I like about this, well, there are a little bit of some mature things in here. This reminds me of what old school comics used to be in terms of, I believe you could hand this to a younger Batman fan, maybe not 3 or 4, but a 6, 7, 8-year-old. They could read this and really get what comic books used to be. A little bit of danger, a little maturity, but still wholesome enough, enjoyable enough, captures the characters in a great way while taking the series very serious. It reminds me a bit of the tone of like Batman the animated series, where there's this dash of the fantastical with these really cool grounded stories. And so I can't recommend this series highly enough. I know it's 11 issues in, might be a bit to track down, but I think the trades of this, if you missed this one, if you skipped it, I think it's really worth going. And I think the part that makes this great is Wade and Samney do such a good job working with each other. It's one of the rare comic book relationships where you can tell they just sort of play off each other well. They had a great run on Daredevil, a very underrated run on Black Widow. I think overall, this is just a great comic book that's really enjoyable. And if you want some good Batman stuff, you got two good options this week to pick up. Other book I'll spotlight, Justice League Red #2, Solid and Ahmed on this, along with Henry on the art. I really enjoyed the first issue of this book, and I think the second issue did really well. There's a really cool appearance of Cyborg in this comic and a really cool use of the character. There's a very intriguing plot with this, and that Red Tornado has kind of run some scenarios and seen some doomsday things sort of happening. And so he's enlisted a couple members of the Justice League that he feels like can actually help prevent these while keeping the main Justice League out of the loop. And what I think he's done a good job is there's enough intrigue of that plot that you want to see where it's going. There's really good characterization of Power Girl and Cyborg in the book. And I think one of the cool things is when DC Comics, as a DC Comics fan, I think they so often, give themselves not enough credit for how deep the roster of DC heroes is. And so I think this book really has a lot of potential. It's great to see some of these characters like Cyborg, and I think even Simon Bass, Green Lantern, who was really intriguing when Jeff Johns was writing him, who have kind of gone by the wayside a little bit. There is a couple lines of dialogue in the comic that can come off a little bit too real world focused, from my opinion, in this, but not enough that it distracts from the story. I'm sure some folks can extrapolate one line and kind of try to blow it up and say something about the book. I think if you read it in the context of it, it's really not much to get bothered about. And I haven't seen anybody doing that, but I can imagine there's one or two lines of dialogue where I was like, a little too focused on the real world sort of stuff. But I think it's a fantastic book. The art in it is really, really good from Henry. I think he just kind of captures that classic sort of superhero, larger than life sort of build to it. And I like seeing that in the DC Comics universe. And one of the appeals of DC to me has always been the fact that it is less real world than Marvel. But I think it's an interesting team. It's an interesting concept. I think it's a series that has a lot of potential. Again, will it last? Based on Solid Ahmed's track record, and I'll say even, for myself, he's writing two of my favorite Marvel characters. I haven't really liked what he's done, but I think this might be more his approach. I think this actually really works pretty well. I think it's pretty intriguing. So I would recommend giving it a try. Price point on this is $3.99 as well. So not a huge financial investment, but I think if you like the depth of DC Comics, especially if you like Cyborg, who's a great character, I think he gets a great appearance here. I'm interested to see what'll could go off the rails, but I do think this is worth recommending checking out. I think you will enjoy that one. Last two books I'll talk about that I'm going to tentatively recommend. I will say these are more personal enjoyment, and so when I mention these, this is more from a specific angle that I think these are worth recommending, as opposed to just saying these are fantastic books that you should pick up. And so, Amazing Spider-Man #12, Joe Kelly on this one, Ed McGuinness on art. Ed McGuinness kills it on the art in this book. This book is actually focused on the Norman Osborn reveal that he has been standing in for Spider-Man. And so we get a lot of internal narration from Norman. We get a little bit of appearance of Ben Riley, who's kind of posing as Peter Parker while Peter's been put into space. I think why this book works, and I think this one I'll kind of try to discuss a little more in depth why I think this is interesting. However, I understand there's going to be fans who hate it. Look, there's no more villainous character to Spider-Man than Norman Osborn. He is absolutely Spider-Man's greatest enemy, in my opinion, and a quite frankly despicable character. What I think is intriguing with this, I will give Joe Kelly a lot of credit for the fact that one of the critiques that I have of comic book writers is oftentimes when they have to deal with plot threads that were implemented in previous runs without much consideration for the fact that there was an audience reading those, they'll retcon things, swipe things aside, and not deal with it. And one storyline that I haven't really known how to feel much about, and that I actually kind of love the idea of it, was started during Nick Spencer's run, where he kind of had that Norman Osborn got by this, the Sin Eater character kind of cleansed him of all the evil that he had, and then he had been trying to be this gold goblin character and trying to be an ally to Peter, and that had been really emphasized in Zeb Wells' run quite a bit. And now you've got Norman while Peter's gone, trying to fill in as Spider-Man because he'd been sort of his ally. Obviously, there's going to be people who that rubs the wrong way. I don't blame you on that. And again, I'm not a fan of characters not inhabiting the mantle. However, I do think if you throw an intriguing character into it and you write it well enough, you can really build some things that are interesting. And so, what I thought Joe Kelly did a fantastic job in this comic book of Norman Osborn feels like Norman Osborn with a little bit of the crazy removed from him. And so there's some cool things about when he's fighting the younger Spider-Man characters. I loved the fact that he was winning that fight for the majority of it. And there's dialogue about, these younger Spider-Man characters like, Spider-Boy and Miles Morales. They don't understand how long I've been fighting, Spider-Man and prepping for that. And I thought that was really cool to showcase Norman in that way. And that, I think it's also a cool comment on Peter in that, like, this is his greatest villain. And he largely essentially is able to defeat Spider-Gwen and Miles and a lot of these other characters. And I think that's really cool that they kind of set it up that, like, hey, when one of Spidey's main villains goes for it, really Peter's the only one who could take him. And I thought that was a cool way to write that because these characters, these other ones are younger. They shouldn't be able to hang with the Green Goblin. I think also the way they examine Norman kind of dealing with the fact that he is responsible for all the horrible things that he's done, even though societally, he's not incarcerated and he's technically been kind of cured of all that craziness that he had as the Goblin. And so I thought it was really interesting. I think it's an intriguing look at things. Is it going to rub some fans the wrong way? Absolutely. But I think what I will say for this is, for Joe Kelly to explore this fully, I appreciate that he's embracing what came before, and I do think it is an intriguing plot line to take on, and it's different ground than we've gone through before, and so. It's an interesting comic. It's a good read. I think if you want something different and you want to have a comic book, you're like, man, I haven't seen anything like that before, and not in a stupid way where you're like, this is so dumb. Because I do think Joe Kelly really dedicated a lot of page space to explaining why this is happening. There's some really self-reflective moments, and when Norman has to confront Spider Gwen and deal with what happened with Gwen Stacy, I thought that was a rather poignant moment that was in there. And so I got to give it credit. This is the fourth or fifth issue in a row that he's done well. There was a couple lines of dialogue in the Ben Riley um, scene in this that just felt weirdly written. It's so weird, and I think Joe Kelly kind of has a weird balance in that some of these pages are so well written and so self-reflective, and then there's a brief kind of cutaway to where Ben Riley's filling in for Peter, kind of taking over his life at this job that he has with Rand Enterprises. And it just seems like those pages are written by a different writer because they're very pop culture referencey and kind of come off more like a 45 or 50-year-old trying to sound like a cool younger person. And that was weird. It was such a stark difference from the Norman Osborn pages that seemed to be written so well. And so Ed McGuinness does a good job on art, but I would recommend it. I do think it's good. I think if you've been disappointed with Spider-Man as I have dang near a decade now, I think it's worth checking out. Will it bring you back and make you think it's amazing? And I do think there's some folks who'll pick this up and go, this is stupid. I don't want to see Norman Osborn as the Goblin. I do think it's interesting. And so I would overall recommend it. I think it's worth checking out. It's the first time Spider-Man's been intriguing, and I've kind of wanted to see where it's going to go in quite a while. Last book I will tentatively recommend, and I did a full review on this, is the Batman and Deadpool comic book. Again, not a perfectly written book, but I think it accomplishes the assignment of what this book was supposed to be. This is a crossover between a DC and a Marvel character. You're not going to have long lasting developments. You're going to play the hits. You're going to have Deadpool get the predictable jokes in there that you'd expect at Batman's expense that read much more like the Ryan Reynolds Deadpool from the movies than the great character that Deadpool was in the 90s. There's some cool scenes, but where I will recommend it, look, part of the comic book hobby is sometimes there's just stuff that's cool. And getting to see Batman and Deadpool mix it up for a couple pages is something that normally you wouldn't get to see happen anywhere but with action figures or in fan art. And the fact that you have Greg Capullo drawing it, I can't deny that that's cool and that's fun. And if you take it incredibly serious and you read this for, I want an in-depth, breakdown and I want emotional stakes, and you're not going to get that out of this. But I don't think you're ever going to get that out of a DC Marvel crossover. This comic's job is to reach out to a broader audience, to try to bring people who probably would never go to a comic book shop to buy this. I'm imagining this will be one of these things that's like mass printed when they finish the second part of it, and showing up at Walmarts and Targets and things like that, and selling well on Amazon and stuff. And it seems much more of a market reach out kind of thing than it does. And I'm a fan of it. While I will give this a lot of credit, as look, I think Marvel and DC have a responsibility to comic book shops and comic book fans to do more crossovers like this. Fans clearly want it. We love when they do it. And with the state of the comic book industry, I do think it's worth supporting that initiative. I would like to see it maybe executed a little better for sure, but I think it's a good first step. I really hope, I think it's the 50th anniversary next year of the original Superman Spider-Man one. I'm hoping the reason those two weren't in here is that that's the next announcement, that we're going to get those two. But I'm always going to be happy to see Marvel and DC put aside whatever differences they have, and for the better of the comic book industry, try to put some stuff out there. Because, at least here locally in San Antonio, talking to a few folks I know at shops, this was a great week at the local comic book shop for a lot of those places, seeing people come in. And does it create sustained success? Probably not. But it's a great thing to see that. And it seems like an unequivocal win for those stores. And if it's a win for the store, it's a win overall. And just in all honesty, you can say I'm being short sighted, blinded by nostalgia, blind spot, whatever negative thing you want to say. There is a part of me that just loves seeing Batman and Deadpool on the same page for a couple pages. I'm like, there is a part of where it's just at the end, it's like, that was kind of cool. And so, again, not a great comic book, not something where I'm like, oh my gosh, changed my mind, but changed the way I saw comics or anything. But I think it's fun, and I think sometimes we need to allow a little bit of fun. I think sometimes with comics we take things just slightly too seriously, and we're a little too focused on the negative when we turn wins into losses. And I get that negative mindset. I certainly have gotten in there at times myself, but sometimes they throw something out there like this, and it's like, it's okay to just have a stupid comic book that's kind of fun and plays the hits. And yes, it's predictable and it's got the tropes in it, but it is kind of cool, in my opinion, that happened. But let me know what you guys think down below. As always, agree or disagree, feel free to let me know down. If you think these books were bad this week, that's okay. Just know when I recommend stuff on here, when me and Mike go on here and recommend things, it's truly because we think as comic book fans, there's a good chance you'll enjoy it. So hopefully these if you take these and recommend them, I think you won't be disappointed. But as always, appreciate seeing what you guys think. Never pretend we're the experts, just two guys talking comic books most of the time with me and Mike on here. God bless you, folks. I hope you have a great weekend. If you're going to enjoy any of the Batman festivities for Batman Day that's in most comic book shops here in America, hope you have fun, and we'll catch you in our next video.